To order and ask you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good afternoon and welcome to the Minnehaha County Sioux Falls City joint meeting on July 23rd, and I'm sure glad it's not January because I don't want to be shoveling snow. I'd remind you to silence your cell phones if you have not already. And I would recognize that there is a quorum present for Minnehaha County with Commissioner Kelly, Commissioner Barth, and myself, the city.
And would the clerk run roll call, please?
Council members Anderson, Erickson,
Here.
Erpenbach, Jamison,
Here.
Karski,
Here.
Kiley,
Here.
Rolfing,
Here.
Staggers.
Present.
A quorum has been noticed. Then I would also add that the item number 2 on the agenda has been asked by the requested by the presenter to be withdrawn from this agenda and moved to September 22nd. With that, I would ask for the county to approve the agenda with the change.
Motion to approve agenda with the change.
I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda with moving the item number 2 to September 22nd. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
And the city needs to approve the regular agenda also. Can I have
So
a motion?
moved. Second.
And a second by Karski. Roll call, please.
Council members Anderson, Erickson,
Here.
Jamison,
Yes.
Karski,
Yes.
Kiley,
Yes.
Rolfing,
Yes.
Staggers.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. With that, we'll move on to the agenda item number 1, which is the federal flood insurance rate map amendments. Jeff Schmidt.
Thank you very much for having us today, this afternoon, for this very important topic. This was our first opportunity to get in front of this body and give this information forward. At 7 o'clock this evening, we'll be at the downtown library, the Siouxland Library, to give a public presentation. And then tomorrow evening, we'll also give the public presentation. But we wanted to have one opportunity at least to get in front of the elected officials. So again, I'll give a little introduction here before the other representatives get in front of you. So topics for discussion, not only now, but in the next 2 public hearings are, it's a very coordinated effort between a lot of agencies. This floodplain mapping project has a project areas. We'll discuss the changes. There is an appeal and a comment process that takes place. There'll be a schedule that we'll show you in the slideshow as we get through the end, and then the schedule at the very end to give you the update. What the community responsibilities are for Minnehaha County and the City of Sioux Falls as we get through this process, and what this all means with the floodplain mapping to the National Flood Insurance Program. At the very end, we'll be able to answer questions as we go along. You can see some of the agencies that are involved with this process. I will not read these all off, but you can see there's a broad delegation of officials here that are able to speak on these topics. So we have delegations from a lot of agencies, and they'll all kind of be able to get up and speak on this topic in regards to the floodplain for the City of Sioux Falls and Minnehaha County. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That's going to go ahead and give you a little bit of an overview on the project that's been taking place over the last 15 years.
The original Sioux
Good afternoon.
Falls
If
Flood
you could just
Protection
identify
Project
yourself,
was
excuse me, if you could just identify yourself.
Kevin Adams with U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Omaha. The original project was designed in 1956, and it was designed for a flood of 24,400 CFS on the Big Sioux River. It was constructed and completed in 1961. In 1969, we had the flood of record on the Big Sioux River, which was 40,000 CFS, or considerably larger than the design flood. That prompted a feasibility study completed by the Corps of Engineers in 1993 that determined the level of protection provided by that flood risk reduction project was closer to approximately a 1 in 30-year event rather than the 1 in 100-year event that was desired. Construction for improvements to bring that level of protection up to what was desired was authorized by the Water Resources Development Act of 1996, and additional authorization was authorized by the Energy and Water Appropriation Act of 2010. For those that are not familiar with the project, I wanted to go over just the major components of it. We do have a map here that shows what the different components are. The diversion dam is up at the north end there. And that diverts all but the largest flood flows from the Big Sioux River east, and so it follows the diversion channel on the north side and the east side of the airport there. Under the large flows, we would have split flows, some going along the diversion channel and some along the historic Big Sioux River channel. There's also a diversion weir in the diversion channel that in conjunction with the diversion dam tends to pond water back up to recharge the city well fields. We do have a spillway chute, a diversion channel spillway chute that takes water from the diversion channel and dumps it back into the historic river channel. There's a new confluence dam near Skunk Creek and the confluence of the Big Sioux River. That was constructed under part of the Phase 2 levee improvement projects, and that structure prohibits backflow water from Skunk Creek continuing back up north into that area. The levees between the two, the diversion dam and the confluence dam, were not improved as part of the levee improvement projects. We do have levee upstream of the diversion dam that was improved under the recent project. Levee on Silver Creek upstream on the north side, that was improved as part of the project. We do have a levee downstream of the confluence dam, downstream of Skunk Creek. On both sides of the river there, those levees were improved as part of the project. We have a levee downstream of the spillway chute on the right bank that was not raised as part of the levee improvement projects, but it was realigned and fortified with larger and more riprap to protect it from releases from the chute. We also have a levee on the left bank of the Big Sioux River there, downstream of the chute, that was not improved as part of the project. And then we do have a little bit of levee upstream of the chute between Falls Park on the right bank, between the chute and Falls Park, that was also part of the realignment. The Skunk Creek levees on both sides were improved as part of the project. We do have a number of closure structures that are associated with the project identified on this map. And there is also part of the Sioux Falls Flood Risk Reduction Project that is a flood walls in the downtown area. And there wasn't any improvements made to that under the recent construction. So that is a summary of the project itself. It is important to note there's a couple of items that the project reduces but does not eliminate the risk of future flooding. Very large floods will exceed the capacity of the system. And although we have approximately a 1 in 200 year level of protection for these levees, if we would experience a much larger event than that, the levees would overtop, and we would expect to see extensive consequences and damages, possibly even loss of life.
Thank you. Again, if you just identify yourself, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean McNabb. I am with FEMA Region 8 and wanted to go through what everyone can expect as we start to walk through the project over the next couple of months. So the first thing that we have here on the slide is the preliminary date. So about a month ago, these maps went preliminary in the community. And essentially what this is it's the initial look at the maps, looking at the data, understanding what's changing, what information is there. And as we walk through a little bit more of the slides, you'll see that there's a due process for comments and appeals, appeal resolution, adoption of these maps by the community as well. So, so this is really what kicked it off, though, was the release of the preliminary maps on June 26th. On the next slide here, it shows the entire project area, which the Army Corps talked about around the perimeter there, the Big Sioux and Skunk Creek. Those are the major areas of the study, and then as well there's some new portions north of I-90 that are part of it as well. Essentially through the FEMA mapping process, the maps are broken out into panels, and that's what those shaded areas are. So there'll be 19 panels updated for this study, both in the county and in the city, and that's what this map is showing here. Specifically for Sioux Falls, really the project area is focusing on the levee area here, and these are the panels that are going to be updated. These panel numbers are really important in terms of adoption of the maps and administration of the maps as you're looking at them, going through the profiles. This will be where to find a particular area, these mapping numbers here. So that's kind of why we laid them out like this. These will be the changes that the floodplain administrators or anybody else using the maps will be looking at. So that's the panel scheme that you're seeing there. On the next slide, this is also the area outside of the city limits, up near the area of Renner subdivision, north of I-90 there. There'll be a few panels updated there as well as a result of the study too, which we'll go through in a little bit more detail on the next slide. There are changes happening. There are increases in the area, the Renner subdivision, which I know there's been some media information about. So we wanted to be sure to hit on those areas during the presentation and answer any questions that anybody may have. We also have a handout up here as well, which we can hand out, which kind of goes over some of the basic questions that are there that you may get or that you may have about the project if we don't get to address them during the discussion today. There's some additional information here as well as a little bit of a takeaway. But essentially the results that we're seeing, the changes in the Renner area, are due to different modeling techniques and different data, newer data, newer technology that's being used from the update of the maps that happened back in the 80s to now when we're using them. So the big changes are the hydraulic structures, Highway 38 and I-90. So the way that those structures are modeled in the new system shows the water flowing differently through them, essentially bottlenecking, causing backups, or not flowing, the confluence of the water isn't flowing all the way through as it was in the old model. So that's why we're seeing some of the changes through these areas. So really, the reason for the changes is the different technology that's being used and the different hydraulic structures, bridges that are being looked at in the newer modeling. There was also an increase in the hydrology, so essentially that's the amount of water that's in the system. So there was a 4% increase in that as well, and essentially that's because we just have a longer period of record from the last time the study was done in the 80s. We have more information, more stream gauge data, more rain information, and it showed a 4% increase there. So there is a little bit more water in the system, but really what we're seeing is a difference in how those hydraulic structures are modeling, which is accounting for the differences that we're seeing in the mapping. There are tons of resources out there right now. We've been working quite a bit with the communities to get them out there. This is one of the resources. It's the changes since last FIRM is what we call it, the FIRM being the flood insurance rate map. And really what this product here is to do is to demonstrate where there's increases and decreases during this preliminary phase. So we can see where the floodplain's changing and where we can anticipate where there may be questions or do additional outreach or information like that. So this is available online. It's publicly available. You can go in, you can type in your address. It'll zoom into your location of your home, and it'll show you if you're in one of these zones. The blue essentially being that there's no change, that's the floodplain exists the same as it does currently on the effective maps right now. The red, as you can see up north of I-90 there, those are going to be the increase areas that we're seeing, and the green are going to be the areas of decrease, and that is a result of the levee project that's going in, those decreases there. So through that, there will be a due process, as I alluded to before. We'll talk about the schedule in a minute, but there's a big difference between what we look at in terms of comments and appeals that can be brought forward during this time. Essentially, when you're looking at the maps, there's going to be roads, there's going to be stream names, there's going to be information. The base flood elevations will be listed on the map. So during there's comments that can be submitted on those base map features. If there's a road name that's incorrect, if there's a stream name that's incorrect, something that got overlooked, those are things that can be submitted as comments to make sure that when the maps go effective in the community, they most accurately represent the community at the time. If there's annexations or anything like that that go on as well, we can be sure to update that. Up till we get to a certain process around 6 months before the maps go effective, we can continually update that information. So we have, at least at that time, the snapshot in time that's most accurate in the community. That would be something that would qualify as a comment. When you're looking at appeals, essentially what we're looking at is technical data to either refute or change the map. So it would be the same demonstration of the data that was used to create the map. It'd be different information that you may have to say, wait a minute, when I add this structure in a little bit differently and look at this, I'm showing this result. And you could essentially bring that data to the mapping process through the appeals, and we could look at it, have an objective third-party review, and in some cases that data could be incorporated. There could be a change or discussion with, excuse me, I got something in my throat, a discussion with the appealant about resolution to that appeal. So the big difference here is we're looking at, one is kind of refers to street names, base map features. The other one is really getting down into the data and the basis of the study, and that's going to be the difference between your comment and appeal. So the remaining project schedule that we have left here. So right now we're looking at the community review and final meetings. So after these meetings happen, we'll have a publication in the Federal Register. And that typically takes around 30 to 45 days. We send off the information. It has all the community names, all the changes that we're expecting. That gets published in the Federal Register. After that happens, we'll work with the communities, and there'll be 2 publications in the local newspaper. On the day of that second publication is when the 90-day appeal period will start. So we're probably still looking somewhere between 30 and 60 days from that 90-day appeal period being officially starting. But that being said, you have the maps in your hands now, so by all means, please review them, look at them, evaluate them, and during this time, information can be being collected. It's just during that 90-day appeal period is when the information can formally be submitted for due process. After the appeal period, the formal 90 days, you see that there's a 60 to 90-day window there, and that can even be a little bit broader. We get into appeal resolution. And depending on the number of appeals and the nature of appeals, that's going to depend really on how long that resolution period is going to take. If we receive no comments or appeals, obviously that's going to move very quickly on to the next phase. If we receive a few appeals that are pretty in-depth and technical merit, then what we'll do is we'll go through the resolution of that, have some coordination meetings with the appealant and go through that, so you can see how that could start to take a little bit of a time. But once we get past that appeal period and we know if we have submittals, the timeline gets a little bit more solid after that. And you'll see on the next slide that there's some broad estimations of timing there. And that's just to give an idea of what we're looking at. So you can see as we move through it, we're kind of estimating in seasons right now because to account for that variability. So we're anticipating that the appeal period would open up in the fall of this year. We'd have resolution by the spring of next year. We'd have our resolution complete in the spring. And then after that, we'd essentially issue what's the LFD you see there. That's the letter of final determination. That's the notice to the communities that all of the appeals have been resolved if there were any. The maps are ready to be published, and it initiates the community's adoption period, which is a 6-month period where the communities will go through and adopt their ordinance and adjust anything that they may want to look at. The best guess right now, just based on some of those variables, is that would be in the winter of 2016. So that's when you'd see the impacts of the new mapping in the community being affected and being adopted. And that effective date, when we start talking about flood insurance, is the date to which the lenders are going to look at flood insurance requirements for anybody that may already have an existing policy or may be required to get a new policy. So that's the key date there. Up to that moment, everything is still in flux because the maps haven't formally been adopted by the community and are still being finalized. The next slide here is just a little bit of a look at the responsibilities at the community level. Again, we're talking about reviewing the preliminary maps, making sure that the data that you're looking at is good data, it's solid data, understanding the data, and submit those comments to FEMA during that time. Again, we'll work with the community to resolve any of the appeals. There are some outreach requirements coming up. Obviously, this public meeting is one of those. There's outreach materials and links which the communities will work on, if that's publishing on the county or the city website information, if that's outreach to citizens that may be impacted by the flood mapping changes. And then some outreach as well when looking at encouraging residents to think about flood insurance. So those are just some of the responsibilities there. The map and ordinance adoption, alluded to that on the last slide. That letter of final determination will come out, and then there'll be a 6-month adoption period, to which at the end of that adoption period is when the maps become effective in the community. There'll be a ton of coordination during that adoption period with the state and FEMA as well, just to make sure ordinances are up to date and there's no questions going on there. And there's a bunch of questions that come up during this time period about use of best available data if there's new information out there, and the use of most restrictive information that's out there. So if there is new information coming out, but it's less restrictive than what's being shown on your current map, you still would need to use the information on your current map for development or anything like that. If the information is more restrictive, then the community can choose to use it there as best available information. That's what that last bullet point is talking about there. So just a few key things here to close out before we open up to questions. National Flood Insurance Program, did want to hit on this. There's a couple different scenarios here, and we're going to go through this at the public open house meetings this evening as well. So there's a couple ways that the things that can happen here. There can be a change essentially from low or moderate risk to high risk. And that's going to be those areas that you're looking at on that map where you're moving out from not in a flood zone to the red, in that case on the map, the changes map into a flood zone. So you're moving out and then you're moving in. So there could be a mandatory flood insurance requirement there if you do have a federally backed loan. And that's something we'll go through in detail tonight with residents that have questions about that. There's also the chance where you're in a high risk flood zone and you're moving out. That's going to be those areas that are in green on that changes map. And the Corps alluded to it earlier, thinking about residual risk. The mandatory purchase requirement will probably be removed in most cases there, but flood insurance is still available. It's at a different rate, and to think about those residual risk areas that you are behind a levee, but there's still a chance that a flood can happen, but you'll be able to purchase flood insurance at a reduced cost. So it still is really important to think about the risk in those low to moderate risk areas. It's not mandatory purchase, but the option for flood insurance is still there. And then there's no change in risk level, which is basically those blue areas that you saw on the map. Nothing is really changing. If a property owner has insurance currently there, they're going to be expected to continue to carry coverage through there. And if they don't, then nothing will probably change there. So just a kind of a high level view of some changes that you might be able to see there from 3 different perspectives of the audience that we expect to see at the open house this evening. A few more things here. Lenders and insurers must use the effective map. That was really what I was trying to get at during that 6-month adoption period on that date, that final date, that effective date. That's going to be when things change. That's going to be when the new maps that you're looking at are going effective, and those insurance requirements will change from them using what you guys are currently using in your processes to the new maps. And that's where you may start to get a lot of questions, or homeowners may start to see inquiries about them getting flood insurance, especially in the increase areas. There are basically any zone that you look at on the map that starts with an A, that's going to be a 1% chance, or also referred to as a 100-year flood. When you're looking at the zone, those are going to be your mandatory purchase areas. You're going to look at some of the other zones that are B, C, and X. Those are going to be your low to moderate risk areas. Always like to throw in there, even though they're out of that high risk zone, we still see 20 to 30% of our flood insurance claims come from those areas. So again, thinking about the larger picture of risk in the area is really important. Wanted to provide a link to the flood insurance reform just as a resource to go out there and do more research if you're interested. We could have a 1,000-page slide deck on flood insurance reform, but wanted to be sure to provide just a resource there. And as always, we're here always as a resource as well, if you have any questions. When it comes to flood insurance, the agent's really going to be the first line. That's going to be the person that the homeowner is working with or the business owner is working with. They can go through the details of their policy to understand what the cost may be, why the cost is this. So the agent really is there. FEMA and South Dakota OEM are there as resources as well. And then just to get good general information, floodsmart.gov is a great resource as well. There are some additional things here. We had added some links in case we wanted to go into detail about the questions. That first link up there is the link to that changes map that's out there for everybody to take a look at, that's going to show the changes. The second link there is going to be a place where anyone can go and download the preliminary maps to take a look at. And that third one is the Sioux Falls website, where they have all this information posted as well.
Thank you, Mr. McNabb. Are there any questions? Start down the end, Councilman Staggers.
Yes. In terms of the information that you have now, the maps that are tentatively out there, we have winners and losers. What would you say? Do we have more winners, or do we have more losers, or can you give us some insight on that?
So there definitely are some changes. I think honestly, when you're looking at it, everyone's a winner in the case of that we have a better idea of the risk profile in the community. We have a new updated model. We have better information. We have a better idea of what the true risk is in the community right now. Mm-hmm. So there are going to be some changes when it comes down to, there are some people who are going to potentially have to purchase flood insurance now. But the benefit is that they understand, or hopefully understand and know, their true risk now as well, and they have good data to support that risk. So I think that there's a benefit to everybody, honestly. Yeah.
But at the same,
in terms of having that information at their disposal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good for people to know where they really stand.
Yes.
And but once again, do you think that we're going to have more people paying insurance now, or not?
We're still under the review process because we've just had the maps. So even though the media is here and they're going to quote me on this, these aren't specific numbers. Back in 1982, when the city of Sioux Falls was in the floodplain, we had approximately 800 properties in the floodplain. Mm-hmm. Okay. In 2009, when we came into the floodplain, we went up to 2,200 properties. We added 1,400 properties into the floodplain. Okay. At this point, I'm tabulating about 500 properties in 2015. So we went from 800 to 2,200. Now we're back down to about 500 properties. Oh. So significantly lower than 2,200 properties.
Oh. That sounds good.
Councilman Jamison is next.
Thank you. For me, could you bring up the changes map? The problem for me is the individuals who are now in the red, I guess. I never thought from the beginning, when, at least from my years on the council, that we would ever be putting new people into risk. It was always taking people out. And am I interpreting that right, that those people in the red now were not in it before, but now they are?
That's correct. Yeah.
And is that because of, frankly, new software, new criteria that you used in your determining of the flow and all of that? That's what put them in? So
in the way that the old model was used and the way that the hydraulic structures, so the bridges along I-90 and Highway 38, they were modeled differently in the old model than they currently are now with new information. So essentially the water was more or less allowed to flow over and around the structures in the old model. And now we have the information there to know what the bridge actually looks like, what the geometry is, what the top deck of the bridge is, and understand how that flow then comes in and moves through the bridge versus just moving through sort of as a wide swath of water. It's being channeled into those areas, which is causing some backwater, which is where you're seeing those increases. So there is some difference in the way that the area was looked at and evaluated with the modeling techniques, which is why we're seeing those increases. Does that help? Does that help address or answer your question?
Well, I'm just maybe one last part, if I could, then. What would it take to change what we've got in place now so that those people are not included?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and we have the SHMO here as well, the State Hazard Mitigation Officer. Some type of project could potentially be an opportunity there where you're seeing that bottlenecking of water through those bridges and those structures, potentially working with the state to go through some sort of grant application or project, potential to do mitigation there where you could get more flow through there to reduce the backwater impact is one potential option to help reduce the impact in that area.
Commissioner Kelly.
I believe I've heard, was there 100, most of these are in the county.
That's correct.
Most affected area. Is there about 100 affected?
There is. Yes, there's about 100 affected properties. Some of those are currently in the floodplain right now. They're just seeing an increase in the amount of water that's there as well. So there's some that are newly going into the floodplain and some that have always been there. They're just seeing an increase in the amount of water elevation.
Do you have any idea how many of those 100 already have flood insurance?
You know, that was something we talked about right before this meeting, and I don't have those exact numbers, but we can work with our flood insurance specialists here and get those numbers to you. Absolutely. I don't have them off the top of my head, though. No.
Councilman Kiley.
Thank you. Mine, number one, I do appreciate the improvements that have been made to our levee system and the reduction in property owners that will be adversely affected by the requirement of purchasing flood insurance, in a lot of cases unwanted by the individual, even though it was for their own protection. But going back a little bit to the history and some of our original slides, we had the '69 flood. I was 15 or 16 years old at that time, and I remember that it could have had a tremendous negative impact on our community. And then the next portion of the slide mentioned a '93 feasibility study. So we have a 24-year gap. Is there something that was missing that could have been placed in the slide? Or did we go 24 years without evaluating the system?
Great question.
Well, we had the '69 flood, and then the next portion on the slide was a '93 feasibility study.
Could you use the microphone?
Was there something that could have been included on the slide that was not, or did we have a 24-year, nearly a quarter-century period of time with?
We do have that gap between the flood and the time all of the authorization was done for the feasibility study. When the data was collected and the analysis was done and the feasibility study was formally published, there was a 24-year gap.
To me, that's quite alarming that we would have such a gap when it could have had such a tremendous financial impact on this community, because major employer at that time, John Morrell, was severely in jeopardy of being flooded, as well as a lot of other properties and property owners. So what is our current schedule for evaluation and reevaluation of our system after today, or after this is approved and enacted?
As far as
for another event, or what is the process?
I'm not aware of any updates to the hydrology or the hydraulics or any other plans to do anything more than what has been done to date.
Okay.
Councilman Karski.
Thank you. First of all, I'm a little disappointed. We were hoping for a flood rate map because we changed our levee system. We spent millions and millions of dollars. We borrowed the money. We fronted it for the government. And we wanted to take all our properties that were placed into the new flood rate maps out. And it seems like we're complicating things by going and something that's totally non-related and wrapping it up together with our levee system. And it appears to me that we can make the process a lot quicker if they were two separate rate filings. Why do we have to do these two things together? Why do we have to have two rate maps or two changes to the map when really we were just trying to accomplish one thing? I know you have a comment period, and I imagine that adding all these properties to it is going to really you're not going to get real positive comments out of that, obviously. So why are we doing this together? Why couldn't we do them separate?
So part of the study, and you do have current effective maps in the community now, and so anytime there's a new change or anything done to the mapping, we essentially have to tie into what's existing. And so that's where you're seeing some of that stuff come from the northern part, is that there are changes. The panels were updated because of the new information, and we have to take that data and chase, it's the wrong word, but like find a way to tie it into what's currently effective there so you have a seamless risk profile in your community. And that's where you're seeing the risk profile extend farther north.
Where does it end?
It ends just right at the tip of, basically at the top of that map right there, what you're looking at. That's the end of where it is and where the profile ties back into the current effective mapping. And so there's a seamless risk profile from what's currently effective not being updated into what is newly being updated. And that's just to ensure that when you're not updating the entire county as a whole, you're taking pieces and you're updating panels that when somebody goes to look at it or you use it for permitting or regulating or flood insurance, you're not seeing big gaps in data and you're not seeing huge differences in data where you may have, you know, the risk profile be this wide here and then this wide here and the next, you know, right across the street is what we're trying to avoid, is to have a seamless risk profile. And that's essentially where you're seeing that.
So to use a word that Councilor Jamison uses, we're kind of being disingenuous when we're saying that these people aren't really affected by our levies. They aren't because of the levies, but because the levy work was done, they are being affected by it.
The update, through the update, we're seeing changes. Yeah, it's not a result of the levy, as you said, but through the update, we're seeing changes. Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Barth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the presentation, and I know that it's difficult for some people and better for others, but it's been suggested for years that Highway 90 was causing a backup up towards Renner, and it's always been denied. But now we're finding out that maybe it is somehow affecting, and certainly I suspect prehistorically the floodplain was 2 miles wide and 2 inches deep, and now we're channelizing it into a tighter spot. But some of the area affected also is infrastructure. The highway going up towards Del Rapids, you know, clearly there's a huge amount of people that commute that way, and you know, should we make plans to raise that highway to protect it in case of that 200-year flood, or should we just roll the dice?
I definitely wouldn't want to make any recommendations in terms of what you're doing, but I definitely think understanding the risk profile now that you have the information, understanding what the risk is, and the resources that are here to maybe help strategize mitigation solutions, with the State Hazard Mitigation Officer being here and using him as a resource, as a potential to look at mitigation projects if you see areas of concern. But I think you're hitting on one of the key things here, is these maps are showing risk, and you've looked at them and you've identified a risk that you're seeing, and it's a great way to start thinking about how to mitigate that risk in the community.
Okay. Sean, I have one question too, and I realize you already stated this, but I'm going to ask you to state it again. How long do residents have before they actually have to have their flood insurance in place? If there's a flood 3 weeks from now and these maps are in the process of working through, are they going to be responsible for not having their flood insurance? So I'm wondering, how long do they have?
Sure. So the maps that you're looking at right now will not be used or administered for flood insurance until they're formally adopted by the community. And our best guess is the winter of 2016 when that would happen. And as we get through the process, we'll be able to see a little bit more of that. What's currently being used in the community is the map that's currently adopted for flood insurance requirements. So the residents aren't seeing any change there until the maps are formally adopted.
Okay.
Does that help?
That answers it. Are there any other questions for Sean?
I'm going to answer it just a totally different way.
Okay.
Sean did it correct, but we added 1,400 properties this last time in 2009. So big impact to our community. If they go to an insurance agent right now, the agent's going to pull out and say, you're not shown in a floodplain, so they can get a discounted rate right now because they're not in a floodplain. If they want to wait, they can until it's mandatory, but then when they go to the agent, they're going to go, oh, look, you're in an A, and here's your risk, and this is what your premium is. So They're not being required to hook up until that time, but they can go now and be proactive and get a discounted rate. But that's really hard to tell people to save the money now and go and do it now when they don't have to. So that's the recommendation that we try to let people know, is to do it now and do it early. And at the same time, they've been in the floodplain since 2005. They've been, I mean, just because the model now is correct, the model before just didn't show it that they were in the flood. They've always been in the floodplain.
Actually, will help citizens out to the effect that they didn't know they were. Now, if there is a flood, they're actually aware of it, and then they might be covered, where had a flood happened and they weren't covered, they would have been in trouble.
We would just hope that they would know their risk and buy their insurance.
Right.
But they don't have to.
Are there any more questions for staff? This was a briefing. I don't see any additional questions. I thank you for coming and sharing new information with us. With that, we will go on. Item number 2 is old business. Is there any old business? Item number 3 is new business. Is there any new business?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Barth.
I would just like to remind everyone that the Sioux Empire Fair starts this Friday and invite everyone to show up and spend some money.
Thank you. I'd look for a motion from the county to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second from the county to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Motion passes unanimously.
I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. And a
Second.
second. Karski, Kylie. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Meeting adjourned.